Smoke signals from around the campfire.
My name's Suzi Martineau and I am the founder of the Tree Conference.
Which has just happened in Frome this weekend.
It has just happened in Frome this weekend. It was its second event. The first one was in Glastonbury, where I had been living for 15 years. And it kind of came out of that landscape there. And that felt like a very perfect town to bridge and hold the various different groups that we were trying to provide a forum for, in terms of, foresters, conservationists, people interested in tree consciousness. Obviously Glastonbury is really able to support that kind of difference. And then this year it felt really good coming to Frome. And that's what we did on Sunday, and it was great to be at the Merlin Theatre and have that feeling of the slightly theatrical aspect of the presentation. And it was an enormously exciting experience.
What you say about Glastonbury and its area is interesting, because I get the sense the southwest is a bit of a melting pot for alternative ideas. Would you agree with that?
I think there's something extraordinary coming up through the landscape here, and I think it's got communities that have a legacy of supporting that narrative to be expressed without being too squashed. I mean, it's not the case that it's not squashed, but the phrase that keeps on coming to mind is "West is best." It's not that though, is it? It's just there's some very, very strong wisdom in the land here, and I think the communities represent that in a way that is very important for the world right now. Yeah.
This was the second tree conference. How did it all come about? What gave you the inspiration for it?
Would it be really crass to say trees?
No.
So I had when I had two small children and I was living in a relatively rural situation outside Glastonbury, I definitely struggled emotionally to cope, and I found myself going out, and I found myself feeling very supported when I sat with trees, and that I orientated myself and was able to process quite a lot of emotional information, as well as my feelings about what was going on in the climate, and I started to notice a pattern to the different ideas I was having around different trees, and I started to write them down. And I started to research them online, and I started to find the most amazing science. I was drawn to the work of people like Diana Beresford-Kroeger, and obviously the innovative work of people like Wangari Maathai in terms of planting projects and community projects. And the more I looked, the more I found. And I think I got to a point where I had felt like the combination of what it was that was coming up through the landscape, what it was that it was like the trees had implicit in them that we could be doing, and this combination of science and the opportunity in the landscape of Glastonbury of being, to some extent or other, having a history of being an oracular sort of place, felt really relevant to pull that together. And then my husband's family offered for us to move into a house in Suffolk, and so I knew I had to leave, and I couldn't bear to go without having followed through on what had up until then been notions, like feelings that this thing could be the case. And I suddenly realised at that point, no, that I really meant it, and so I arranged to do the tree conference really rapidly after that. But it was also because I wanted to meet all the people. After having done this research and knowing that people didn't know that trees contribute to all cloud seeding. There was so much, and that the tree sisters exist, and that they're trying to reforest the tropics, and the idea that that's not in the news. I got very excited about both meeting them and drawing them all together, and so that's why we did the first one. So I think one of the things we were talking about was the IPCC report, and the fact that the newspapers have tried to cover that, and they've covered it in the way that they've been given the information from scientists and from the UN around what we're trying to do is reach carbon zero by 2050 by reducing emissions, cutting emissions, and what we felt very fortunate in the timing of the tree conference is that we have a message that's very clearly articulating that we need to include sequestration or drawing down the carbon through working with nature to meet those targets, and also because we want to make sure that we work towards supporting life in the oceans, so therefore it's not just that carbon stays in the upper atmosphere and then potentially risks causing ocean acidification to continue.
What can nature teach us?
Whole lot more than the internet. Though, the internet is quite cool.
In moderation.
Yeah. As long as you're not taking it as your main information source, then it's handy, good research tool.
So listening to nature, this popped up again and again, both from the stage and in the private conversations I had yesterday about listening. And I think it relates also to wider notions of social change and how we change ourselves. And
oh, yes.
Is there anything you want to say on
Oh, it's just really hard to pick which bit. There's so many.
Pluck one out.
Okay. There's different angles, isn't there? From the scientific perspective, the fact that we've been so obsessed by this version of objective science, and then we discover that that's almost like a complete misnomer because, oh, lo and behold, quantum physics shows us that actually we collapse the wave function. I want to say wave function, wave form, and through the act of observation. So therefore, we are implicitly forcing something. We're changing something by looking at it. So this idea that we're impartial observers. Anyway, so something lying behind that being like, what is it? This magical thing that we're looking at? What is it? This relationship we can be having? And I think we've got this extraordinary body that is like this amazing scientific tool for connecting in to what that other thing is on so many different dimensional levels. And I think the opportunity to explore that directly with like anything, like with this wood, with these bricks, with the clouds, is really exciting. That your body can be telling you something about that thing through your physical interaction with it, or through your mental focus and connection with it. And I think that's an incredibly exciting way of working. And I think that's probably what I've really enjoyed about working with trees, because when you do that kind of imaginatively to try and get a sense more of like what it's like to be a tree, or like what's going on for it, then suddenly you're like up in the clouds, you're down, you're rippling through the ground, and you're starting to you can really learn a lot from doing that. It's a great fun way of working.
What about people who live in the urban environments? How do they connect with nature?
Oh my gosh, this is so difficult because I don't know how far out it's safe to go in Frome. But I'll tell you, I think you've got the most astonishing angel, Frome. Really amazing. I think there's some similar form of consciousness that exists around forests of people in cities as exists around forests of trees. It's all nature. We're all nature. These bricks come from underneath the stone. Like the metal has this other extraordinary qualities. I think we need to have access to nature being near us, because actually some part of us needs to be friends with plants and, needs to feel messages from the wind in some way that we can't quite explain. I think it's very hard to live in a city if that means that you don't have a narrative with your natural world, for sure. And I think it's been very easy for us to objectify again, and to be in a situation which is, there's some very divisive forces around, it's a very divisive thought forms and cultural expectations that make it really easy to disconnect in a town. But I don't think it has to be the case. I think that particularly Frome has been extraordinarily supportive, and it's bringing something through in the consciousness of the people here that is something that extends far outside the reaches of town, and has the potential to be working very much on behalf of nature globally. So yeah, it's yeah. I don't know if that's an answer.
I think so. What other key themes emerged from the conference yesterday for you?
Oh, so that's difficult because I can tell you what the key themes of the conference were, but I don't. But as to what they emerged from those key themes, I'd have to reflect on that a tiny bit because I'm still in the process of recovering, and just trying to be really gentle with myself. I can tell you the key themes of the conference are to highlight the fact that there are really extraordinary earth regeneration, reforestation, sequestration methods that humans could be doing, and they're already doing them. They're already regreening deserts. They're already working in extraordinary ways all over the world, and we just really need to share those patterns and those ways of working and meet each other and realise that actually that's very normal. There's 70% of the world's food is produced from the Gaia Foundation's brilliant We Feed the World exhibition by small organic regional farmers. We're already doing this extraordinary thing, and that needs to be a greater part of our awareness that that's actually what's going on. Two would be that there's extraordinary science that's come out in the last 10 years. It really is the last 10 years. There's been the science around trees, around ecosystems, around what's going on with the fungal networks. We just know so much more in the last 10 years than we've ever fully understood through our scientific eyes. And I really wish that people were taught that in schools, or people knew much more about that, because it's so good. And then the third is that it's possible to halt deforestation, and that now is a really good time to activate a strategy that means that we do that before we lose the last of our ancient growth forests.
I noticed in a way it started with perhaps the most precise scientific speech at the beginning, and then broadened out almost step by step to a fascinating case history with Isabella Tree, and then moving into Mary Reynolds Thompson's accent on how you change the narrative and the story. I was going to ask, I wrote down here, change begins at home in our daily habits, choices, how we listen, learn and interact with others. How do you see the work that the Tree Conference is doing in the wider context of social change, so broadening it out to that perspective?
Well, I'm really, really interested in supporting awareness of trees and their consciousness and brilliance and contribution and needs globally. I think we've got into a situation where we've got slightly embarrassed about mentioning how reliant we are and what great allies they are. And I want to support people both in education, in law, in science, to not be embarrassed about fessing up about actually that they are really conscious and they're really cool, and we can create a safe space for us to be working, moving forward, articulating the wisdom of nature and embedding that much more seriously in both our legal systems, our education systems, and our business plans moving forward.
And the question everyone asks, what can I do on a daily basis that can make a difference?
Well, I mean, there's lots of things that people say, but I find it really hard to have judgment calls around anything that anyone does, because sometimes you just feel moved to do something and you don't know why it's important to you, and then you do it and then you realise you dropped your key and you picked it up, and like this. Sometimes some people feel pulled to move away from using leather shoes because they want to be more vegan, but then somebody else wouldn't want that plastic. I mean, it's so individual and it's such an individual path. But I do think understanding that everything around you is conscious and intelligent and deserves to be treated with love and respect and reciprocity, be it a waste paper bin plastic bag or a really beautifully carved African ornament, or your food, or the water that you're drinking. The idea that it's all in some ways sort of personable, and has its own rights, and it deserves to be respected as it becomes you, and you eat it, and like that. So I think that's actually really one of the things that's been the hardest and slowest process for me, is to just allow how conscious and how interesting and how intelligent everything is around me, and to respect it, for whatever it is, whether it's made of anything, because it's all, part of nature. Yeah.
How should we be doing politics?
Ooh. Oh, that's a meaty one, isn't it? I do really admire and lift up the work of Froom's independent party. The way that they have put aside party politics and worked to represent the individual needs on a sort of topic-by-topic basis of the local town, I would say is a very good model. I think when people say, oh, what can we do? Well, get involved. Like, do something like that. That's a really amazing way that you can support the infrastructure for change. I basically, at the point that the Conservatives got in for the second time, I don't know how long ago that was. I think and it was also that the SDP was going to take over Scotland, and Labour was never going to have a majority for quite some time. I knew that it wasn't going to be that my and not that I am now currently aligned to any political party right now. I knew that my voice and what I wanted to be said was not going to be said in the Houses of Parliament for at least 10 years, and that we globally, climate change-wise, didn't have time to wait for there to be somebody in there who wanted to approve of whatever it is that we were doing if we campaigned well enough. So that I gave up on expecting politicians to be a conduit for the level of change that I knew I needed for my children's safety. So I'm very much more interested now in communicating with people and communities and the people who are actually doing amazing things. I think our real leaders on the whole are in communities and in projects, and they're who I look to, they're who I want to lift up, and they're who I want to support the voice of, so that it's strong enough and it's clear enough that actually politics reflects that need for that voice to be articulated. And I would sort of call that the voice of creativity or creation or listening or sensitivity or awareness to the, to what's going on and to each other. I think those qualities have been underrepresented in the Houses of Parliament, and until it is that they are strong enough outside government, I don't think they will be represented in the House of Parliament. And I think it's our responsibility to strengthen our relationship and our confidence in expressing our relationship with nature and expressing what we learn through our sensitivities and what we learn through our intellect and our study about how these phenomena work. And at that point, then I become interested in politics again, like properly. Yeah, and I do read the news. I'm very, very much following politics, but the trade deals that are going on at the moment, and the fact that our government doesn't actually even seem to want to enact the power to run them through any kind of environmental standards, and actually force deforestation in the Amazon. That on that level, I'm just like, are you guys, who's in charge here? Is it that you're just trying to impress some dudes who are like some big corporations, and you're trying to like, oh, we can be friends with you because all of us down here, I just don't think it's working for us.
Well, Trump's comments last week about almost excusing what's been going on with Saudi Arabia in the Turkish...
Do you know, we'd be in a position to be critical if the EU was much better, but actually the EU has been driving and forcing some of the most appalling things. The British government has been condoning that and walking alongside it, and it's not even the case that in the process of getting out of Brexit, they have at any stage articulated that they would take responsibility for those trade deals. So, I think it's rich for us to point the finger at Trump, frankly. Yeah.
It was interesting that George Monbiot in Bristol, when we heard him talk just over a week ago, was saying we almost have a duty now to support what Labour are doing, because they're moving into a position with the new Labour Corbyn project where a lot of the things we all want are within touching distance.
Yeah.
For someone like Monbiot to be saying that, who's never aligned himself with a political party or been a member of one, was quite telling, I think.
Yeah, I think so. But I also think that as much as they might be saying some of the things that George Monbiot has been interested in happening, they're not saying a lot of the things that I'm interested in happening. So they don't represent the voice of nature well. They represent the voice of people who are in cities or in factories or in, you know, the working classes. Or I don't even like the phrase working class. They represent the rights of people that are not being represented in a way that's great. And I think it's totally right that the state of the mental health in the UK is just, it's devastating. But I don't think that's going to be bettered by continuing with the same lack of connection with understanding what's going on in the countryside and perpetuating that with another group of people who then get into power and think they've done really well, but actually they have. What's the change? What's the change in terms of our actual safety for our children in the future?
So what plans next for Tree Conference and for yourself?
Well, I mean, a lot of stuff is in the lap of change, and whatever happens. If we receive more funding, then that's one route. But it's sort of stopped now. So I'll probably look around for supply teaching in the area that I've moved to. And that will be good because it'll put me back into education and see what is going on since, because I did a role of being an examiner for maths a year or so ago, and that was really helpful to see the new exam papers. I'm very concerned about the effect of the new, so I'm a teacher by trade. I'm very concerned about the effect of the new, the way that the maths exams have been implemented. So yeah, that'd be interesting. But mainly, what I know that I can commit to in terms of with the Tree Conference is that I think we're going to be looking to do some kind of training over winter, possibly online, to support people if they want to hold some kind of Tree Conference related thing, so that we can share what we've learned, and then we'd run next year as an open event. So that anybody who was interested in doing that or running an event like that in their country or their region could follow what we were doing, and then they could use that as a jumping off point for probably vastly improving on what we do the following year.
That's almost identical to the Campfire model, really, where we have no prescription really, but we try and build what we call templates of experience, where others can read what has happened in Brighton or has happened in Edinburgh or whatever, and use some of that if they want to. But ultimately it comes down to the makeup of the people in each area.
Yeah,
and what
I mean, I think
skills
the
and
only
interests they bring to it.
Absolutely, and I think it's also like for the bioregional stuff, like it's so different what different landscapes need, and it's so different the different groups that are involved in doing stuff. Even though there's a lot of national ones and there's a lot of international ones, there's still so much regional diversity that you couldn't kind of be very the only thing that I would say is that I think what's really important is that you maintain a forum where all forms of expertise are truly respected and honoured. So, you know, you don't get to bash foresters, right? You don't get to bash like tree hugger hippie stuff. Like, you don't, you know, let everybody to have a space where it's safe for people to be having direct experiences, and that be their wealth that they bring, or for people to be scientists and that be their wealth that they bring, and for everybody to take a bit of time to really understand where other people are coming from, and unite around working on behalf of trees, and, you know, how we move forward. Yeah. And
you already have liaisons developing internationally. Kelly is your South American representative.
Well, I mean, there's all sorts of different people representing all sorts of different things, you know, so we've got partnerships in all over, both nationally and internationally, and also there's a whole wealth of projects that we're also profiling because they're amazing models for ways of working. Yeah, and there's also individuals within all of those different projects and organisations who are also communicating with and supporting in how they're working. So there's lots of, you know, networky filaments.
And what would you say to the classic British thing, cynicism? I had a perfect example when I posted about Tree Conference, and a couple of people said, go off and hug your tree, you know, I mean, to bring back your tree huggers reference.
Yeah, I think there's a place in us where we've been really affected by that put-downs. We've got a really difficult culture of put-downs where somehow it's very controlling to use that technique, and we do it to ourselves. So you know, maybe they haven't allowed themselves to spend time getting to know the consciousness of a tree because they feel like they're going to be called a tree hugger. So when they hear that you're doing that, they're like, okay, well, that must mean you're a tree hugger, because that's the label that comes up for them that means that they can't do that. And, you know, I go into secondary schools and I make it clear from the word go that I am so am a tree hugger. But actually, the truth is, I don't spend a lot of time hugging trees, because it's just much more interesting looking at a whole lot of other stuff. Like, you know, I meet very few trees that actually need a hug. Like, that's pretty rare, I reckon. But, you know, I'm up for it. I don't care. And if people see me doing it, I don't mind either. Yeah. But cynicism, I think, is much harder. It's not just the cynicism around that. It's the cynicism around that we're, you know, how powerful and beautiful and creative we are. That I find very sad. Yeah, and it's almost like when you go into schools, you just want to be really clear right from the outset. Okay, when you behave, you know, you have this thing and it is cynicism, but there's this whole other way of behaving, and you just don't need to do that.
I suppose British humour is so defined by that cynicism, isn't it? It's how to get beyond that. And for me, it's been a revelation just reconnecting with nature since I moved out of London.
Yeah, you know, but I don't think it requires that you then aren't funny. You know, I think it's totally valid to, in my experience, you know, like countryside staff and people and all the people working that way are still very up for being very depreciative of them, you know, like or very quick or very quick-witted. But it's just the idea that what you do is always put yourself down or put others down. I think that's the bit of, you know, sometimes cynicism is a helpful tool for not like falling in line with what somebody else says because you just can't think for yourself. You know, there's all sorts of, but it's particularly those bits where you belittle yourself or you belittle others. I think that's the bit that I'd like to just take out and get rid of.
Anything else you want to say?
I like Frome. I trained in Frome as a teacher. It's a very interesting place. You could really look after your spring a bit more there.
Thank you. Lovely to talk to you.
You too.
Smoke signals from around the campfire.